Shabbat Shalom. So instead of more like a sermon per se, I'm gonna give a shiur, like a class. Not as long as most classes, but I want to talk about a very strange mitzvah in this week's Parsha called the Egla Arufah. Okay, the Egla Arufah means the heifer whose neck has been broken. Okay, and in Deuteronomy 21, chapters 1 through 9, if a corpse, and the word that's used is halal, is found lying in the field. And the word halal, I mean, not every corpse is called a halal. Halal is a victim of violence. For example, the Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day in Israel, is called in Hebrew Yom HaZikaron L'Chalalei Tzahal. Okay, the day of remembrance for the halalim of the IDF, right? So it's somebody who's a victim of violence, and you find this corpse in a field, and it's not known who killed the person, right? But now there's blood guilt on the land. So what do? You measure out and you figure out which town is closest to the corpse, right? And then the elders of that town have to go out and they have to take a heifer, a young female cow, one that's never been worked or worn a yoke or plowed or planted, and they take it down to a valley, a wadi, and they break its neck, right? And then they wash their hands over the heifer, and they declare, our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it done. Accept this atonement for your people Israel, whom you have redeemed, Adonai, and do not hold your people guilty of the blood of an innocent person. Then the bloodshed will be atoned for, and you will purge from yourselves the guilt of shedding innocent blood, since you have done what is right in the eyes of Adonai. I forgot to mention at the beginning of the shiur, lest I be accused of plagiarism, particularly since this is posted on YouTube. I am very much indebted to a source sheet prepared by Rabbi Dr. Aaron Smockler of Yeshivat Maharat in New York. Yeshivat Maharat, you may not know this because you may think this is an oxymoron, but Yeshivat Maharat is a yeshiva that trains female Orthodox rabbis. And she is on their faculty, and she prepared this study sheet. Anyway, right, so they kill this heifer, and they wash their hands, and they declare, we didn't shed this blood. Please atone for the land and for the people, and don't hold us guilty of bloodshed, right? And here's the question. What the heck? Right? I mean, I can say something else, but, right? What is going on here, right? Why is it necessary? And what does it accomplish? Right, so Rabbi Smuckler brings three different perspectives. The first one is from Maimonides in his Guide for the Perplexed, Moreh Nevuchim. And Maimonides takes the rational approach usually, and here is what Maimonides says. The beneficial character of the law concerning the Egla Arufah is evident. I have to say, not so evident to me, but Maimonides thinks it is. For it is the city that is nearest to the slain person that brings the heifer, because in most cases, the murderer comes from that place. The elders of the place call upon God as their witness, that they have always kept the roads in good condition, have protected them, and have directed everyone that asks his way. That the person has not been killed because they were careless in these general provisions, and they do not know who has slain him. As a rule, the investigation, the procession of the elders, the measuring, and the taking of the heifer make people talk about it. And by making the event public, the murderer may be found out, and he who knows of him or has heard of him or has discovered him by any due will now name the person that is the murderer. Okay, so kind of like the equivalent of those notices that the police put out, to gain public attention, right? And so maybe somebody will know who it is and they haven't yet come forward, but now with all this hullabaloo, they'll come forward, all right? The mere buzz of the activity, the measuring, the neck breaking, etc., would raise the profile of the event, and the murderer would likely be outed in this way. Okay, and so that's Maimonides, and now we go to Rashi, who bases himself in the Talmud, and here's what Rashi says. Our hands did not shed this blood, but would it enter one's mind that the elders of the court are murderers, right? They say, well, we didn't shed this blood. Well, who thinks you did, right? But they declare, we did not see him and let him depart without food or escort, which would have indirectly caused his death, leaving this man to the elements and to the robbers, right? So nobody thinks that the elders of the town killed this guy, right? But maybe they did things or failed to do things which indirectly led to his death. He was hungry and they didn't give him food. They didn't give him shelter when he needed it, right? They didn't escort him on the way so that he would be protected from robbers. I mean, travel back in those days was dangerous. Okay, so here Rabbi Smuckler says, and I find it really fascinating, the assertion of non-responsibility becomes an implicit assumption of responsibility, right? We didn't fail to feed him, right? We didn't fail to feed him. Well, that means you have an obligation to feed him, right? When hungry people come to you, you have an obligation to feed him, right? And the elders accept that they have this responsibility, but they say we didn't fail in it, right? They didn't say we gave him food. He never came to us or we for food, right? They didn't take a life, but maybe they didn't act in ways that support life. They might have failed in creating the kind of society which protects against the occurrence of a halal corpse to begin with. They must declare their innocence precisely to own the ways in which they might have been guilty. Right? And then Abarbanel suggests that the goal of the jarring ritual was to jar. The elders would break a neck in order to reflect and remind people of the rupture that the halal represents, the break in humdrum reality that such mysterious suffering necessarily services. Life cannot go on as usual when loss and communal responsibility are so palpably present. The Egla Arufah makes space for that reality and even augments it, right? So Abravanel says, there's been a rupture in the fabric of society, and we have to do something shocking to own and acknowledge that rupture, right? And so the question that I want to first ask is, which of these three explanations makes the most sense to you? Yeah, I see you sort of hesitant.
Yes, well, when you were talking, it sort of just hit me that this week we had another school shooting. And we know darn well that certain groups will say, well, we can't do anything about it because we're in charge. Also, we can keep guns out of hands. I mean, this 14-year-old kid's father gave him away. What kind of response did he have? And just, that's one thing.
You stole my thunder. That was one of the points that but I absolutely agree with you, right? In other words, as a society, right? I mean, I didn't kill those 4 people. You didn't kill those 4 people. The father of the 14-year-old didn't kill those 4 people, although as I wrote yesterday, right, he was charged with second-degree murder and with manslaughter, and to my mind, that is absolutely in accordance with the Torah, the next week's Parsha, right, which tells us that we have to have a parapet around our roof so that people won't fall off, right? And we don't say, well, what are you going to do? I mean, people fall off roofs sometimes. Yes, people fall off roofs sometimes, but that's precisely why you have a little fence around, right? And, right, so we're not guilty of the murder directly, but all of us are guilty indirectly, right? Because all of us have allowed the existence of a society where it's too easy for people who should not have guns to have guns, right? And, you know, I mean, I mentioned this, but I speak as a gun owner, right? I support the right of people who are gonna use them responsibly to have guns, right? But not a 14-year-old kid, right? And not a person with a history of violence and so on and so forth. So that's one application, D.
Say it's much more in about, in fact, about if you why is the history of trouble with this young man that was known to, police, to the community, to the parents, for over a long period of time, and gave them the gun after. When I first heard this, I definitely felt, particularly as I mentioned you, I felt that the parents had significant responsibility, but I thought that the level of charges that the father was being given was disproportionate. So I heard the rest of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the system failed, right? The system failed, but the system is us.
Yes.
We're,
And that's something that even when I was working, that we tried so hard to instill in our students. I know not only as a teacher and administrator, but I was also a sponsor of a number of activities in school. And I did an awful lot of work with getting kids to stand up for other kids who were being bullied. When you take that element out of the school society or culture, you minimize something like this happening.
sure, absolutely. Linda, do you
Well, I
want to?
should say the school system evidently didn't give the records of that he had done this stuff from one school to another too. There were so many places in all these shootings where something that is not done, should be done by the people that should do it.
Right, no, absolutely, right? I mean, absolutely. I mean, when you know, that somebody is a danger and you don't, and they have a weapon and you don't report them, right, then you're part of the problem as well, but frankly, I mean, some states have red flag laws and some states don't. We do in America, right? You can go to the police and say, I have reason to believe, and due process, the person will have a hearing, but if the judge finds that the person is a risk and shouldn't possess a weapon, they'll take it away from you, right? But other states don't have it, right? And there's been proposal after proposal to have a federal red flag law. And, I don't want to point fingers, but it hasn't passed, right? So that's one application, and here, look, I have to tell you that to me, the murder of the 6 hostages a week ago today, right, is that kind of rupture in the fabric as well, right? And now here, some of you may agree and some of you may disagree, right? But Benjamin Netanyahu did not kill those 6 people, right? Hamas killed those 6 people, and the invoking of this passage from the Torah doesn't free the actual killer from responsibility, right? And the young man in Georgia is being charged, and Israel is certainly pursuing the murderers of Hamas. And if in the Torah they actually would have discovered who the murderer was of that corpse, they would have executed him as well, providing, one of the things that's also in this week's Parsha is that you need 2 witnesses to execute someone. You cannot execute a person on the testimony of only 1 witness. But I have to tell you, many people in Israeli society hold Netanyahu responsible for the deaths of these 6 men and women as well. I would assert that it's, at this point, a majority of Israeli society, and it is certainly all the families of those 6 who were murdered, right? And Israeli society is convulsing. It is absolutely convulsing, and I promise you tonight, there will be, I mean, last Saturday night, there were 700,000 people demonstrating. And tonight, I think there'll probably be as many, and it's interesting that, you know, Netanyahu apologized to the families of these 6 that we didn't get them back. But at the same time, I mean, I don't know how you apologize and yet take no responsibility. Right? And I don't know what that means. And he didn't, by the way, he didn't say, I'm sorry, right? I mean, you could say, I'm sorry, right? If somebody that one of you knows is murdered, I would certainly say, I'm sorry, right? But that's not an apology, because nobody thinks I murdered, right? But I'm sorry is ani mitzta'er, right? But he didn't say ani mitzta'er. He said ani mitnatzel, okay? And ani mitnatzel means I apologize, right? So I don't know how you apologize and yet take no responsibility. Yeah.
But the difference is that man that you said they found in a field, nobody knew that. But with these hostages, it was very likely that they would be killed. And so the urgency to do something for that was different than when you don't, you know, when you just come upon someone who you don't know that they're gonna.
Right, no, absolutely. I mean, it's not an exact analogy, right? But the point I'm trying to make, and maybe I didn't make it well, but the point I'm trying to make is that there is a societal responsibility that the leaders have in particular, right? And obviously, right, we know who committed the murders in Georgia, right? We know who killed the hostages. So in that sense, they're not this anonymous, unknown corpse that we don't know who killed them, and we might not even know who they are, right? But the principle is that leaders of the society and the society as a whole have a responsibility to not allow conditions that lead to these kinds of things, right? And it's that responsibility that this ritual of the Egla Arufah points to, right? And in that case, I mean, there was a massive failure on October 7th, right? And who was it who said, well, after shooting, oh, it's too early to talk about it, right? It's too early. Let's not politicize, right? So it's either too early or that's past, we don't need to talk about it, right? There's apparently 15 milliseconds when it's appropriate to talk about, right? And it's the same thing in Israel, right? That, well, obviously we have to investigate the failures of October 7th, but not during the war. Not during the war, right? And so if the war continues, le'olam va'ed, right, forever and ever, then there'll never be an investigation, right? So some of the families of those murdered on October 7th, and again, we know who committed the murders. That's not the question, right? The question is who failed to prevent them? So the families have set up their own commission of inquiry, right? But it's not official. But the point, right, we have, all of us, a societal responsibility. And it's not just about guns and murder, right? If we have a situation, where people die because they can't get health insurance, that's an egla arufa also, right? Where people freeze to death on the streets because they can't get shelter, right? And so, in the case of, I am pointing fingers, right? Fingers, but as somebody said, right, when you point a finger at another, you got 3 fingers pointing back at you, right? So, Heschel said, right? In a democratic society, some are guilty, but all are responsible, right? So those of us in the United States, we have a responsibility to create a society where this doesn't happen, right? Are there gun murders? Are there mass killings in other countries? Yes, there are. Are they of the number that we have in this country? No. Why is that? Can it be that there's a relationship between the number of guns floating around and the number of people murdered by guns? I don't know. I was never good at math, but it seems to me that that kind of makes sense, right? So we have, and this is the ritual here teaches us that we don't escape responsibility by saying, hey, I'm not the one who did it, right? Nobody thinks you're the one who did it, but you're part of a society that allowed it, and therefore we should, all of us, share in the guilt in some way. Okay, Shabbat Shalom. And we continue with the Kaddish before Musaf service, 155 or 428. And then Musaf Amida on the next page will say the first 2